Public comment.
Bernard Madoff's 150-year sentence is in the books, but the fallout is just beginning. On Capitol Hill, lawmakers still want to know why, how the SEC didn't catch on to this scheme sooner. Congressman Paul Kanjorski joins us now. Welcome, Congressman, and it's good to see you. We had a bunch of your colleagues on. We had a bunch of your colleagues. We had so many guys from the House on today. I wanted to legislate something, Congressman. I was going to write a bill, and we were going to vote on it. I don't know if it would have passed, though, because I think the Congressman was the fourth Democrat. We had one Republican, right?
No, three.
Three?
Three Democrats.
Three Democrats, okay.
One Republican, Garrett.
That's about comparable to the makeup.
To the makeup, right. That's what scares us. But anyway, Congressman, I understand you requested an update from the SEC, the Inspector General, a week ago. Have you heard anything from the Inspector General about what happened here?
Yes. Inspector General Kotz visited me in my office last week. We had a pretty thorough discussion of what he's doing. And just yesterday, I guess this is an announcement of that. I received a letter of confirmation of what we discussed and some of his suggestions for legislative reform that I asked him to provide for me, and he gave me 4 suggestions. And then he made a promise that he'll have a report by August 31st and a final report by September 30th. So we've made significant progress there.
Can you go into the suggestions and your view about whether this would have helped?
Yeah, let me cite, I wanted to make a point because it came up earlier in your program, Joe. We will craft the best legislation possible, and it's going to be very good. But, legislation and regulation really don't perfect or do anything. It has to be implemented by human beings. And it means they have to be stimulated to do it, and we have to make sure that the people that work in government, the people that work on Wall Street, and the people that deal in the securities business are properly stimulated to implement good processes and good practices. And I think there's a little failure there. I'll give you an example. In the Madoff case, they've been investigated. Madoff was investigated for 20 years, and during that entire time, no investigator ever asked, where are the securities? And the securities were supposedly held in custodial purposes by his own firm just down the hall. If they'd only asked to see those securities, they would have realized he had no securities and that it was a Ponzi scheme. But no, it never dawned on anyone at the SEC to make that inquiry.
Congressman, it sounds like you're arguing for incentive-based compensation like at the financial services firm.
Well, no, and that's one of the suggestions.
Bounty?
That came up. I'm getting a little feedback in my ear from something. But one of the suggestions came up is that we really examine the Whistleblower Act and change it and make it much more likely to be implemented in a good way. That's one of his suggestions. Then there are other things in his suggestions that we maybe look at extending due diligence and certification of due diligence beyond the CEO and the CFO and some corporations, that we make sure that the senior officers get involved with due diligence.
Yeah,
so these are positive suggestions.
Congressman, if I can just ask, this Tobias Lefkowitz from Citigroup, how do we legislate, honesty, integrity? I mean, I understand these are things we'd like to get on the books, but it's kind of difficult to do that. You can't necessarily make people honest.
No question about that. But we can open things up for cross-references and checks and balances and have them laid out with a great exposure to make it much more likely that sloppy work won't be performed or that things aren't easily hidden. I think we have, all of us, I'm confessing myself, I'm sure those folks on CNBC, we get into ruts. And what we ought to do is periodically get ourselves out of those ruts and try and do things toward the same objective but in different ways, just to stir up our juices, if you will. And government has a big problem that way. We've got to get these people. Yes.
Yeah, I was not kidding about it. I mean, people are putting forth the notion that if you find something, if you had some bounty associated with finding something as big as Madoff, you might have had someone a lot more interested in uncovering this instead of a lot of these staff people at the SEC, they end up working for some of the companies maybe that they're investigating, one of the big investment banks. So maybe their reason for being there is to enrich themselves down the road. If they could enrich themselves or have some incentive in the here and now with the job they have, maybe that's the way to go.
Well, we actually have a whistleblower act in the SEC, and it just doesn't function very well, and that's what the Inspector General called to my attention. There are tweaks that we can make to the act, the philosophy and the culture of the application of the Whistleblower Act that can make it much more effective. You're absolutely correct. I mean, just imagine if we offered we offer a 10% whistleblower reward, but it's so difficult and cumbersome to get that reward that now very few people are taking advantage of that offer and that opportunity. But if in the Madoff case, somebody came forward and provided the information that would have stopped that, they could have gotten a $5 billion
Who was going to pay that? We can't even pay back the investors who got ripped off. Who would pay the $5 billion on that?
$5 billion comes out of the actors. We would have that $5 billion would have been money we saved in Madoff, and the money he stole. We would have been able to take it out of those proceeds and pay people.
They'd have found it earlier.
We are able to create reward funds like that, and there are those funds around. Our problem is we all think and start, and we're doing that again. We're saying let's write better regulations, let's write better laws. And how long does that all take, and how fast can we get it done, rather than thinking of let's move a little slower, let's think how it applies and how it's humanly implemented, and let's get that done right. And we're apt to create a better standard and a better performance rate if we do that, and I think we will. We learned something from this, and from all disasters and all problems, we do